Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje fighting. So if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well if you want to request any kind of combat sporting related content. There's been plenty of videos with boxing that have been out there recently, and throughout the whole of January, if you use code AXEL72, you'll get 75% off. And you can also use the Patreon for betting tips or advice, or just general kind of chats with people like-minded in the community. And also, if you want to get back into the gym with some New Year's resolutions and you want to feel good whilst doing so, head over to grindactivekinetics.com. You use code AXEL10, you'll get 10% off, and you can get yourself some new fresh gym wear, and both of them will be linked in the description. Thank you very much. Let's get straight into this one though. And obviously UFC in America, they've now gone over and partnered with Paramount Plus. That's going to be their official broadcaster from now on, and obviously that's huge for America and the whole kind of pay-per-view system and everything like that. But also it's meant that we've kind of been without kind of much UFC action for a little while, and obviously now things are starting to change. We've got this, and then next week we've got another pay-per-view in Volkanovski Lopez, and things are really starting to starting getting going again. But it's been about 6 weeks without kind of any UFC, so it has felt like a little while, and this is a real good card to come back to. I think there's some great fights on this card. Of course, there was meant to be Nunes versus Harrison, which I thought was an amazing fight that I was really excited for, and obviously that's fallen through. But still, like I say, I think the card is very good still. And I mean, I'm going to be speaking about 4 fights on this card, and I'll just kind of give a little shout out to a few that I haven't that I won't be mentioning or giving predictions for, but I will, like I say, just talk about here. Silva versus Arnold Allen. I think it's going to be an amazing kind of striking matchup, and I'm really excited to see how both of them do. I mean, I think Arnold Allen, he's taken punches from Max Holloway and been able to deal kind of standing striking with him, and so how will Silva be able to cause a problem to him, especially with Silva coming off his loss to Lopez. Namajunas versus another Silva in Natalie Silva is a good fight as well. Of course, Namajunas got the bigger name, but Natalie Silva has been on the better run. She's kind of the only contender who's really yet to get her title shot that kind of deserves her title shot, but obviously Shevchenko's been busy with the Zhang fight, and so that's a good fight to be made there, and possibly could maybe, if Namajunas wins, really help get us back into a good title position. Ataba Gautier is making his return, the light heavyweight, in which everybody's really excited by. He's coming off, I believe it was his debut in his last fight. I might be wrong with the UFC, but he made a great impression, and now he's coming back again to come and do so again, and everybody's been very excited for that. And then also an underrated matchup is Alex Perez versus Charles Johnson. Johnson's coming off his very shocking kind of win against Lona Kavanagh, where he was of course able to win by a KO, and Johnson's been able to do that on a few occasions, beat up and stop some of the kind of contenders coming through. And Alex Perez has kind of been on the back end of a few beatings up recently. He's coming off his loss to Almabayev, and so for Johnson, this is a good chance to start putting him higher up in the rankings and actually start to move away from being that of like a ranked gatekeeper. Instead, like I say, actually start to push on into bigger and better things. But we'll start off actually giving predictions. We'll start off with the main event, and that is, of course, like I mentioned, Pimblett versus Gaethje, and this is, of course, a headline slot. And I mean, in my opinion, I don't really know how you can give an interim title fight that of a headline slot over what, in my opinion, was the biggest women's fight around, the biggest women's fight you could possibly make in Nunes versus Harrison, was not big enough to be a main event over an interim title fight. I think that's quite crazy to me, in my opinion. I mean, Nunes was a champion for so long and was such a dominant champion, and Harrison has been, dominant in wrestling and has now come over and been able to, sweep through all of her opponents really easily, and of course, that fight fell through, but just the fact that that was going to be a co-main event to an interim title fight, I thought was pretty crazy. But again, that could be through the egos of the likes of, Justin Gaethje kind of forcing himself to be in a main event slot no matter what, especially, with him kind of forcing this to be for somewhat of a title. I'm kind of surprised to see that uh, this has been made, but it is kind of, just to keep everyone happy, in my opinion. And I mean, it does make sense with Pimblett saying he wants Topuria and Gaethje saying he'll only fight if there's a title on the line. It does work out quite well because there was talks about Pimblett jumping the slot, and getting straight away the shot against Topuria. There was talks about Gaethje getting the shot against Topuria. There's not really been much talks about Tsarukyan getting the shot, but nonetheless, like I say, it to feel what everybody kind of wanted, it was good. But I feel like the UFC shouldn't and won't get used to and get comfortable just dealing with however people their wants and the things that they shout out. If people start saying I won't fight unless it's for a title, they probably won't get it their way most of the time. But just Gaethje, he kind of got it his way. I mean, obviously this is for an interim title, but it suited him enough to get the shot. And obviously there's a lot going on with Topuria, and I'm glad that he is taking the time he needs outside of the UFC to get his kind of outside world issues kind of, I don't know if resolved is the right way of putting it, but getting in a bit of a better headspace for everything that's going on. And I'm also glad to see that, like I say, they are not putting Pimblett straight away in to get a shot at the title when the likes of Gaethje and Tsarukyan are around as well. And I mean, you kind of forget with all the hype and all the talk of him, and also the fact that he's been able to somehow get bumped up the rankings so easily without actually fighting. You forget that he's only coming off a win against Michael Chandler. I mean, Michael Chandler is a good name, and I mean, he's tested some real top guys, but he's never really been able to actually get the wins against the top guys. And so, Pim looked really good in that fight. He dominated, he managed to get a good stoppage, but still, nonetheless, it was, not a huge name. It's not one of, in my opinion, the best kind of ranked guys in the UFC lightweight division. And because of his whole kind of back and forth that he's had with Topuria, and to be fair, the rest of the lightweight division as well, and the hype in which he has behind him, I'm sure the UFC were considering just straight away giving him a title shot. I mean, I know that Dana White didn't enjoy the fact that Pimblett and Topuria faced off after Topuria's last fight, but I think there still had to be one fight in between to then, bridge that gap to then make sense for a Topuria fight, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people agree with that as well. And I mean, this fight doesn't really have to be for an interim title because I think, it won't be too long before we see Topuria back again. But nonetheless, like I say, I'm just seeing this fight as a number one contenders fight, in my opinion, and that it does make sense to happen. But obviously, it's a bit unfortunate for Tsarukyan. Of course, he had his shot against Makhachev and then he had to pull out due to injury. And now it looks like he's going to have to wait a real long time before he gets any kind of chance against one of the top names in the lightweight rankings. And I mean, Gaethje, he looked good against Fiziev in their rematch and he won clearer than he did the first time. But Fiziev was coming off a KO loss to Gamrot, and obviously before that fight against Fiziev, Gaethje got KO'd badly against Holloway, who is, I mean, below him in the rankings, I think. So, I mean, it's not all making the most amount of sense, all the rankings and everything like that, but I suppose it never really does. Nonetheless, Gaethje's back 2 winning ways again. He looked okay, but to see him get a title shot and to really be forcing that title shot, it must be because with him now being 37, if he is to lose again, he could be possibly looking at retirement, in a not too distant future. I mean, if he loses this fight at 37, and if he retires, I would, really tip my hat to him and say, fair play, you've retired while still fighting at the top of the sport. But he might not. I mean, he might try and carry on. It wouldn't surprise me if he does, just because that is the nature and the fighting style in which we've kind of seen from Gaethje throughout his career. But obviously, you know, before the Holloway fight, he'd managed to get a good win against Poirier, KOing him. So he has got some good wins on his resume. He also beat Tony Ferguson back when Tony was fighting for the interim title. And of course, he's a fan favourite with the UFC fans. So that, of course, will also play a factor with the UFC, because they always, like to give the fan favourites like Paddy the Baddy them opportunities over somebody who's not creating as much hype and as much noise around him, like Sarukian was not that long ago. Sarukian's only just becoming a bit more of a fan favourite now than what he was prior. To speak about both fighters individually, though, Pimblett as a fighter, he's got some real nice big kicks. He goes for a real big high kind of soccer kick or football kick, and it's a real damaging kick in which he throws, and he threw it nicely against Chandler on a couple of occasions, and he also goes nice chopping down with the leg kicks as well. And I think he is getting a bit better, with his striking. I think it is better than what it was. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think he should be going and standing toe to toe and striking with Gaethje, but he typically can force you back with his combinations, because they are quite, forwards on rushing combinations, and that could catch Gaethje out, who often is off balance. He typically, in my opinion, is much more of a better, well-rounded, grounded fighter. But, with his skills improving on the feet, he is becoming more of a well-rounded overall type of fighter. But on the ground, I mean, typically he can handle bad positions on the ground well. There was a couple of times early on in which Chandler was doing his kind of statement thing where he just picks you up and drops you and then lies on you until eventually you come off him. But he was never really worried, Pimblett, and he was able to get out of them positions pretty comfortably. He can gain good positions for submissions pretty comfortably and easily, and do it quite often. He controls you when he's on your back, and he's able to keep his legs locked in nicely whilst also being able to either go for that submission or go for the ground and pound. I'm quite a big fan of his ground and pound. I think it's quite damaging, and it hurts and it cuts you open. He's also got just a physically strong base as well. I mean, he says it himself, he's big for the weight, and I think at some point he probably will try and move up in weight, but for the moment, he's physically strong, he's a big guy, he can, hold you down, and he can keep you there. And like I say, if he can get his legs wrapped up, he can really go out there and cause damage. He doesn't have to be lying kind of on top to be able to go out there and put ground and pound in. He'll do it even if he's on your back as well, which is something in which not too many fighters do. And it can cause, of course, damage, and it's meaning he's a threat in whatever position he is in on the ground. And also, I mean, his timing, I think, is improved, and that's on the feet as well. Of course, he was able to cut Michael Chandler's kind of head open with a nice knee, and that knee, I feel like, often is there to land on Justin Gaethje, and Fiziev has been able to land it on a couple of occasions throughout both of their fights, but he's never been able to land it with enough effect to be able to really rock Gaethje, in my opinion. Negatives about Pimblett: he does have his chin in the air still. I mean, I think that's something in which has always been talked about with Paddy Pimblett, how he always has had his chin in the air, so I think in exchanges he could get caught. He has somewhat messy kind of footwork when he is striking, and like I say, he does kind of rush in when he is doing his work, and he can be caught out when he is doing that. He doesn't really circle off too well if he's on the back foot, and he can be made to load up a little bit as well if he's on the back foot as well. He can also be caught out by a surprise takedown. I mean, Gaethje could go for a surprise takedown. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe he does, especially early on. And, that could actually catch out Pimblett if he actually commits to it well enough and he's able to actually get the kind of leg or I mean, he's not very good at getting a double leg, but if he can get the single leg, it might catch out Pimblett. He is not always got the best of accuracy, in my opinion. I think he does get caught with his hands low in range, but so does Gaethje. And he can also trade more than I think he needs to as well. But of course, So does Gaethje. That's kind of Gaethje's style. So maybe, that would just lean into his favour if Pimblett is doing that. Gaethje, as a fighter, he responds with combinations. If he gets caught with a shot, he'll try and land a combination back, and his combination punching is nice, even though for the most part he is only really mainly throwing hooks and then the occasional kind of sneaky nice uppercut, which does land pretty nicely and I do enjoy. He has heart. Again, he's been knocked out on a few occasions now, and of course everybody remembers the Holloway one, but he does have heart, and I don't know how good his chin is, but he's always willing to go into the trenches if necessary. He won't be bullied. He works in the pocket well. He can catch you coming in. That would be interesting to see if he can catch Pimblett coming in when he rushes in. He's got typically quite fast hands, possibly even faster than that of Pimblett. He works nicely body to head, which is again something in which I don't think Pimblett will be too used to. He chops away in the clinch as well, if you are in them kind of exchanges, and he can catch you when he is coming out of exchanges and clinches as well. And again, that's when Pimblett might have his chin most exposed, so that might be able to catch him and possibly hurt him. And he sets a high tempo as well, in which of course Pimblett throughout the 5 round distance isn't going to be used to, from only having fought up to that 3 round distance against Chandler when he managed to get the stoppage. If this does go the full distance, of course we will see Pimblett in that full first 5 round distance for the first time in his career, where of course Gaethje has been able to go through that on multiple occasions. Negatives about him, obviously, like I mentioned, he's been hurt bad. Of course, Pimblett hasn't taken anywhere near as much damage as that of Gaethje. He ducks his head down a lot, something in which I feel like should have been punished more in his career, but he does do that a lot. And I feel like with the knee in which Pimblett was able to land on Chandler, he definitely could land that on Gaethje. He stands right in front of you. He's not really got much defensive movement. He does struggle to gain takedowns, in my opinion, and he can be falling back off balance quite a lot due to the fact that he's always having his legs quite close to each other and often quite squared up as well. He's not really got much in the way of a setup. I mean, he doesn't really use his jab that much. He can just start to rely on, like I say, the hooks quite a lot. He can get caught a lot with his hands low. He won't often make the most of his opponents when they are actually that hurt. If they do fall to the ground, his actual ground and pound isn't often the best. He sometimes throws, head kicks or, random little kicks when there isn't enough room for him to do so, and then he can just kind of fall back whilst doing so, and that's the kind of most dynamic part of his game. He's not really that dynamic or versatile, and I think that was what was catching him out against Holloway. Holloway was able to land these short things. He was able to land a spinning kind of back kick to the head in a short distance because he timed it right and it was working for him. Whereas Gaethje was just kind of unsure what to do and, like I say, just wanting to try and trade, and it wasn't really working at all. And he's also flat-footed as well, in my opinion, Gaethje. So who do I think is going to win? I think that Paddy Pimblett's going to do it. I think he is going to become the interim UFC lightweight champion. He's going to win, in my opinion, via a unanimous decision. I think it will, of course, be interesting to see how Paddy's conditioning is come into the later rounds. But I also think Gaethje will get tired as well. I think he's more used to fighting when he's tired, though. So possibly the later rounds could be interesting. But I think Pimblett, his striking has improved, and I think that's obvious. I think he could, land that kind of knee on the feet as well. I think he can land a nice soccer kick as well and do it to more effect than Gaethje, who, like I say, has a bit more of a limited arsenal in my opinion. But then also he can dominate on the ground a lot more, in my opinion, as well. And I think Gaethje will just probably lie there if he does get put in, on the ground. He hasn't really fought somebody for a while that's kind of been a threat to put him onto the ground. I mean, Poirier wasn't going to do that. Holloway wasn't going to do that. Fiziev wasn't going to do that. So again, you kind of look back towards like the Khabib time, where of course Gaethje got dominated on the ground. So if Pimblett does take him to the ground, I think he'll be able to have a lot of success as well. Possibly even get a submission, but I'm going to go with a decision for Pimblett. Then he probably will get his matchup with Topuria. I mean, unless Topuria is waiting to fight on the White House card against possibly Islam Makhachev, maybe that still could be happening. You know, we don't really know what's going on with that card. If that is happening, then I'd imagine that the actual whole lightweight title will become vacant and Paddy would get elevated, and then he probably would have to fight Sarukian. So either way, it would be Topuria or Sarukian, and a big fight for Paddy Pimblett next. Moving on to the co-main event, and now the new co-main event, I suppose, and that is, of course, Sean O'Malley versus Song Yadong. I think this is a good fight for both, really. I mean, stylistic-wise, it's two skilled strikers who can both get KOs, even though I don't think Yadong is crazily powerful. I mean, Yadong is in a pretty fortunate position to be able to get this big of a fight. I mean, he's coming off his unanimous decision win against Cejudo, which he was winning even before the eye poke, but Cejudo, I mean, obviously just lost to Talbot, so the actual win didn't age that well, but Cejudo, he obviously got poked in the eye, and it was clear that that affected him, and that played a big factor, and meant that Cejudo couldn't continue, and had, you know, Cejudo not been poked in the eye in the fight, you know, been able to go the full distance, then maybe he may been able to have a bit more success and been able to work a bit better. I think Cejudo was actually coming into it, even though he wasn't wrestling at all. I think he was actually, you know, landing a few things on the feet. And to be fair, Yadong, who's typically known for being a striker, did struggle a bit at times with the striking of Cejudo, who's never known for being a good striker. So again, that does kind of look interesting coming into a fight with a very, you know, heavily striking based opponent who is typically known for being a very good striker. But again, you know, if Cejudo had decided to continue or not to continue, and the fight been called off like it was similarly to the Aspinall versus Garn fight, I know there had been more rounds played on, so maybe it would have gone to, you know, still Song Yadong winning. But if, you know, Cejudo had kind of just called a disqualification, or if a point could have been deducted or something like that, if something could have been more done with the eye poke, then perhaps, you know, maybe we wouldn't have been in this position where we are now with Song Yadong getting this opportunity again. Not to say that he didn't deserve it, but I mean, he has a good win against Marlon Moraes, but other than that, I mean, he has since then had losses to both Jan and Sandhagen, and they're, well, I mean, Sandhagen's ranked lower than O'Malley, and obviously, you know, so that Cejudo win is there for Yadong, but it's not really a glistening great win for Yadong. It's just a bit of a meh type win for him, even though it could have been a bigger win if he'd have won without an eye poke. And I mean, O'Malley, I mean, he's coming off back-to-back losses in his career for the first time, and he lost in worse fashion the second time around, where of course he got submitted to Merab. And to be fair, I mean, everybody was kind of saying that O'Malley was looking better in the second fight, and he looked like he was more prepared for what Merab had to offer, but he actually got, you know, stopped worse, and, you know, the fight ended up going worse in his favour. So I think that will definitely play mentally quite a factor on him. The fact that he trained so hard and he just couldn't beat Merab again, maybe will be interesting to see where his mentality is for this fight. And I mean, the fights in which he had with Merab were both kind of very draining as well for him, especially with just the kind of smothering style that Merab has for long periods of time, where he's just kind of allowing you to get back up and then just taking you back down again. I mean, that would be draining anybody. So, I mean, I suppose that will be the interesting dynamic to see where O'Malley is mentally in this fight. But of course, before the whole kind of Merab situation, he had good wins on his resume as well. O'Malley beating Jan, the current champion. That has aged well, even though that was a very close fight and could perhaps create a narrative to get O'Malley a title shot again if Jan beats Merab in their trilogy. And he also beat, of course, Sterling as well, who of course is still kind of floating around high in the featherweight rankings, and Chita Vera, who is still just about, I think, in the bantamweight rankings, even though he's not really that high of a name anymore. But again, them 3 wins are better than the wins on Yadong's resume, and both, like I said, are good strikers. I would say O'Malley is more dynamic in my opinion, with a better strike output and variety, and he's more loose and fluid and more powerful as well, in my opinion. But both have got good hand speed as well, and a good jab. Yadong was able to use that well and quite a lot against Cejudo, who's pairing it up quite nicely, and that was something in which perhaps might be able to disrupt the rhythm of O'Malley. But I just don't think he sets up his power shots off his jab all too well, and I think O'Malley will lead Yadong onto a big punch or just land a big singular shot of his own, even if Yadong is throwing more. I think the gaps will be there for O'Malley to land on. I think Yadong also has his chin in the air quite a lot. I think fundamentals wise, he's got a good boxing kind of ability and striking ability, but I think it is just very kind of fundamentals. It's nothing to make you stand out, and I think if you want to be fighting at the top of the sport, you have to have more than just good fundamentals. I think you do really have to stand out, and I think Sean O'Malley is going to be able to win via a TKO in round 3 in this fight and be able to get back into the winning column in quite impressive fashion with somewhat of a big knockout against Yadong, probably, like I say, in some sort of good, exciting fashion. And then, I mean, who can go on to fight next? I think if Merab beats Yarn in the trilogy, of course it's not even set to happen yet, but if it does happen, then Merab will fight the winner of Nurmagomedov versus Figgy. If Nurmagomedov loses to Figgy, then maybe we could see Nurmagomedov, get pushed aside a bit and Figgy actually start to come through a little bit. But if Yarn beats Merab, then Yarn, he might be willing to face Sean O'Malley just because of the history in which they both have and the fact that O'Malley has one over on him. And I'm sure that's probably what O'Malley is banking for, because I don't think Merab would care enough to straight away go for a trilogy with O'Malley after O'Malley's just got one win. If, they're all busy and they're all occupied, a Sandhagen fight I think would be an excellent fight as well, and I'm surprised that hasn't somehow kind of happened yet. I mean, obviously O'Malley got pushed to the title quite quickly, but that would still be a great fight to be made with two, good strikers. And to be fair, I mean, Sandhagen mixes in the wrestling quite nicely as well now as well. So that, like I say, could be a good fight to be made if the belt isn't available for O'Malley. Moving on to Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Derrick Lewis. I think this is an exciting heavyweight matchup. I'm definitely excited for this. And I mean, Cortes-Acosta has been able to make quite a surprising name for himself throughout the last couple of months. He's had 5 fights last year, winning 4 of them, only losing on a decision to Pavlovich, who of course, typically, well, prior to loss to Aspinall was, knocking everybody out. But then, Cortes-Acosta responded back after the loss nicely with 2 wins in less than a month, which is pretty much unheard of. It's pretty crazy, especially in the heavyweight division as well, against top contenders in both Deiveson and I think it was Shamil Gaziev. And then, both of them was round 1 KOs as well, so that's why he could, have both of the fights and then also be back now for January. And he's also started to use his kind of eye patch to make a bit of a character and a bit of a thing, and start to create a bit of a name for himself through that way. And that was obviously because of the whole Deiveson eye poke and the fact that he carried on to get a KO victory, even though he could have not, just like Tom Aspinall could have carried on, but he chose not to. But Cortes-Acosta chose to. I do just feel like Cortes-Acosta, this fight, perhaps if it was I don't know. Perhaps if Tom Aspinall had beaten Garn, then maybe this fight could have been somewhat of like a number 1 contenders matchup. But it's not going to be. I mean, I do feel for Cortes-Acosta because no matter what he does, no matter who he fights and who he beats in the way of the contenders, I just have a feeling that nobody's gonna give him or care for him to fight for a title shot. I mean, if he goes out there, knocks out Derrick Lewis, goes out there, knocks out Gelton Almeida or Alexander Volkov, or Pavlovich in a rematch, I still don't think anybody's going to care for him to get a title shot. And that's because of the whole stuff that's going on with Aspinall Garn at the moment. That's going to get rematched most likely at some point. But then we're also, talking about Pereira versus Jones. There's hype being created around that for the UFC cards at the White House. So there's just a lot of bigger names around the kind of talks of the heavyweight division at the moment, and I just again feel for any of the top contenders who are really actually starting to shine a light and come through. The same with Volta Walker as well. I mean, if he manages to be able to get a win in his next fight, then he's kind of really in the talk with the other contenders. But again, I just don't feel like he's going to get a shot at a title anytime soon. I do feel like Lewis has kind of been in the UFC forever, to be fair. I mean, he's been in the UFC since 2014, so 12 years now? And of course, he has the most KOs in the UFC, and he's always managed to come out of nowhere and get a big KO, even when his career looks to be going downhill and he starts to get matched against new contenders. He was, beginning to look like maybe he may be on his way out of the UFC after 3 losses to Ivasa, Pavlovich and Spivak, especially with I think 2 of them ending in KOs. And then he also lost, he got a win and then lost shortly after to Almeida as well. Again, it just wasn't a good look and it was kind of pushing him out of the rankings a bit. And then he started getting matched up against new kind of contenders and new names who were definitely risky, 2 Brazilian guys in Nascimento and Teixeira, but he was able to knock both of them out in very impressive fashion in the first round. I mean, Teixeira was meant to be the undefeated Brazilian guy coming into the rankings, good KO pedigree, good, like I say, actual resume with the fact that he was undefeated, but then to get knocked out in round 1 by Derrick Lewis is pretty brutal, to be fair. And I mean, he kind of has now deserved Derrick Lewis to get himself a shot back in the big fights, and a win here will be a big kind of help to then again, like I say, push him up the rankings again for another time in his career. Again, Derrick Lewis just always knows what to do to be able to get a win when he needs a win. And I mean, he doesn't necessarily need a win for his career at this point. So again, we'll see what version of Lewis we get. But if he does beat Cortes-Acosta, I think that does help him to get bigger fights more, just because he is a bigger name. But it does also benefit Cortes-Acosta as well, because like I mentioned, Lewis is a bigger name. It's probably going to be one of the biggest names on Cortes-Acosta's resume in the way of UFC kind of history that Lewis does have. Cortes-Acosta, I don't believe has insane power, but to be able to land that same overhand followed off the jab on both of his last 2 opponents is very impressive. And I mean, I do feel like he will get backed up at some point by Lewis and he will just start swinging, hoping that he can catch Lewis, which he has done on both of his last 2 fights. I mean, that's how he got eye-poked against Deiveson, and he did that just before, and he actually did catch Gaethje and then followed up with the overhand afterwards. But I mean, if he just starts doing that, he might be able to catch Lewis, but I think Cortes manages his range a bit better than that of Lewis, but Lewis will be enjoying to be allowed on the front foot against not a massive kind of big heavyweight in which, Teixeira was, but I definitely feel like he can hurt Acosta. Of course, Lewis is a massive puncher and he's pretty, explosive the way he flings himself in as well. And of course, he will be throwing to hurt. I mean, both Gaethje and Deiveson weren't really able to get any of their real powerful work off, whereas Lewis will straight away just go in with the powerful work. I'm gonna go with a surprise Derrick Lewis KO in round 1. That might be a bit of a bold prediction, but I think again Cortes-Acosta will welcome the pressure of Lewis early, and I think Lewis will just fling himself in and manage to get another dramatic KO in round 1, and I think he'll catch Cortes-Acosta off guard, and like I say, the big power of Derrick Lewis will really come through, and I mean, if he misses it, or if he goes past the first round, I think it will definitely go into Cortes-Acosta's favour, but I just don't think he will. I think he will, like I say, throw to hurt straight away, and not really care about what Cortes-Acosta's doing, and like I say, Cortes-Acosta will go on the back foot and just allow him to do so. And it's a huge win for Derrick Lewis, but you kind of look at the rankings and you kind of see that Derrick Lewis has fought everyone. So anybody in which he faces will most likely be a rematch. He could face a Pavlovich again, but he's already been KO'd by him. He could face an Almeida again. Possibly that could happen. Almeida's coming off a loss. Maybe that could happen. Or a fight in which could definitely happen if Derrick Lewis wins this fight would be a Blades rematch. Blades did actually lose, I think, back in 2021. It might be a bit earlier than that, to Derrick Lewis via a KO. And so, obviously, Blades has been able to build himself up ranked into a better spot than that of Lewis. So, there could be a rematch there to be made. And like I say, I'm sure Blades would welcome that. And then moving on to the final fight in which I'm going to be speaking about on this card, which is Umar Nurmagomedov versus Deiveson Figueiredo. And again, I think this is another good matchup, even though for some reason it is quite low down on the card. It's kind of the headline slot of the prelims. It's not on the main card. Maybe they're trying to excite the prelims up a bit for the non-paying fans. Again, I'm not too sure, but Umar is coming off what was a good win against Bautista to get back into winning ways, but I mean, he did still show bits of weakness where it wasn't a complete dominant, career great performance from Umar, with him getting himself, in a bad kind of ankle or toe hold position where Bautista, was really getting on that toe hold and really cranking the ankle of Nurmagomedov, and Nurmagomedov was able to do well to get out of it, but again, still showed, a little bit of vulnerability on the ground when he was being a bit too maybe overconfident on the ground, and he also did get caught with a big kick as well, which did wobble Bautista. So again, overall, for the most part, he was able to wrestle and to dominate on the ground, but like I mentioned, he did have a couple of moments of weakness where, Bautista was able to show his skill, and almost the fact that he showed the weakness, and the weakness at both times, could have then led to him being stopped, was, again, showing the vulnerabilities. And with him, possibly being in the talks for, the winner of Jan versus Merab in their rematch, in their trilogy, it does make sense for Umar to be out again before that, because, again, like I've touched upon, we don't know what's happening with Merab and Jan, and Jan, if he beats Merab, might go down the O'Malley route. So for Umar, at least if Jan beats Merab again, he has the argument of, well, I've just beaten, two top contenders, I deserve it over O'Malley, who would have only just beaten one top contender. So again, Umar, I think, is making a good argument here with this fight with Figgy, and I think it makes sense to kind of face the next free bantamweight opponent. And to be fair, Figgy's a big name as well, and again, like I say, it makes sense. It would be interesting to see if Umar's able to get possibly a stoppage if he wins this fight, because of course, against the big names, he hasn't actually got a stoppage in his UFC career so far. I don't think he's been able to stop anybody since he's been in the rankings. I might be wrong, but I think I'm correct with that. Or at least, like I say, especially since he started to fight the bigger names. Figgy isn't really on the best of runs. He looked to be down and out after his KO loss to Sandhagen, which is a pretty brutal, submission, then turned into a KO loss. I believe that's right. And then, before that, he was coming off a loss to Jan as well, which was, a competitive fight, but still a loss nonetheless. But that has aged well. And with, the Jackson matchup, he fought Montel Jackson, and it was a matchup in which it did look like the UFC were kind of feeding Figgy to retirement, but he managed to get a win in his home country, which was a close fight, but still a good win where Figgy, was able to deal with Jackson, who was the much bigger guy, and still take him down and still have success on the ground, and actually looked good in that fight and looked good when he needed to look good. And that win, of course, kept Figgy in a good spot in the rankings in 7th, and if he's able to get a win here, this could be a big upset that could really put himself back in line for a title shot. After he lost to Sandhagen, I was amongst kind of most people thinking, there's no chance that we're going to see Figgy fight for a title again. But if he beats Umar, then that is, like I said, a huge boost in his career to then suddenly get jumped into a possible title shot. And I think Umar has shown that he isn't really wanting to use much stand-up anymore, which I think is smart. I mean, he did well against Bautista to set a kind of overwhelming pace and keep that on the ground, and to just keep going to the ground and keep wrestling and keep getting the inside trips, and to keep, like I said, just keep Bautista on the ground. And, yes, it was through 3 rounds, but of course he was able to do that without really getting too tired. And obviously he did get very tired at the back end of the Merab fight, which is where Merab was really able to come into his own, because Umar was so tired, but he didn't seem worried or scared about kind of gassing himself out in this fight, in that last fight of his, which was good, and was something which I was interested in because, of course, everything that happened with the Merab fight. And I do like Nurmagomedov's trips a lot, and I think he's able to also get himself out of trouble very well with his scrambles and his twists and his spins, on the ground as well. And this could end up being the battle of the inside trips, as I know Figgy does like to use them as well. He was able to use them well against Jackson as well. And I think Figgy also could possibly be better with his hands than that of Nurmagomedov. And I don't think that Nurmagomedov is really the best with his hands. And I don't think that Figgy will be able to handle Umar at this point in his career. And I also think if Umar gets the body kicks going, he could hurt Figgy as well with them body kicks. And then, like I say, overwhelm him on the ground. I think he's still good on the ground, Figgy, but I think he's best when his opponent isn't that comfortable on the ground and isn't wanting to be in that position. Whereas if he's with an opponent who wants to be in that position and can deal with being in that position, then I think he'll struggle a bit. And I think that Umar Nurmagomedov will win via a unanimous decision again. I don't think he's going to be able to get a stoppage in this fight and get a first big name stoppage on his resume, but still, like I say, I think he'll be able to win relatively comfortably via a unanimous decision. I'm going to say that the Bautista fight will probably be harder, in my opinion. That's no disrespect to Figgy, it's just at this point in his career. But then, like I say, most likely kind of fight the winner of Jan versus Merab, because he can make that good argument with him being on a 2-fight win streak compared to O'Malley, and then it would kind of just make sense. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.